What if I told you there was a man who walked with the Father of faith, who ate with angels, who was called righteous by God himself, and who still managed to lose his wife, his home, his wealth, his dignity, and very nearly his daughters, all because of a single choice he made, standing on a hillside, looking down at a well-watered plain. A man who had every advantage, the right family, the right mentor, the right God, and who traded all of it slowly, incrementally, one small compromise at a time, for a view of the valley and a seat at the city gate. He is not the villain of his story. That is what makes it so unsettling. He was not a wicked man. He was not cruel or openly rebellious or indifferent to God. The New Testament calls him righteous. It says his soul was tormented day after day by the lawless deeds he saw around him. He knew the difference between right and wrong. He felt the wrongness of what surrounded him, and he stayed anyway. He stayed and stayed and stayed until the angels had to take him by the hand and physically drag him out of the city before the fire fell. His name was Lot, nephew of Abraham, survivor of Sodom, the man who chose the wrong city and lost almost everything because of it. This is his complete story: the journey, the choice, the city, the angels, the fire, and the cave at the end, where everything that remained of his life happened in the dark. Don't look away. It begins now. It begins not with Lot, but with his uncle. Because to understand Lot's story, you have to understand who he was attached to and what he walked away from. Abram, who would later become Abraham, was the man God called out of Ur of the Chaldeans, with a promise so large it could not be contained in a single lifetime. In Genesis 12, God told him, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing." Abram went. The Bible says it simply. So Abram went, as the Lord had told him. He took his wife Sarai, and all the possessions they had gathered, and the people who belonged to them, and he set out for the land of Canaan, and he took Lot with him. Lot was Abram's nephew, the son of Abram's brother Haran, who had died. Lot was family, and he was brought along into the promise. He did not hear the call himself. He did not leave his country in response to a word spoken to him personally. He left because his uncle left. He was part of the journey from the beginning, but the journey was not originally his. This distinction matters, because Lot's whole story is in some ways the story of a man who is adjacent to the promise, rather than inside it, close enough to benefit from it, close enough to be protected by it, close enough to see what it looks like to walk with God, but never quite fully his own man before God, never quite walking in his own call the way Abraham walked in his. They traveled together through Canaan and down into Egypt and back again, and during those years both of them accumulated wealth. In Genesis 13:2, the Bible says Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And verse 5 tells us that Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. Both of them were prosperous. The land they were traveling through was not able to support both of their operations in the same place. The herdsman of Abram's livestock and the herdsman of Lot's livestock began to quarrel. It was a practical problem. Too many animals, too little grazing land, two large operations competing for the same resources. And Abram, the older man, the man who had received the promise, the man who by every cultural convention of the ancient world had the right to choose first, responded to the conflict with extraordinary generosity. In Genesis 13:8-9, Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right, or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." He gave Lot the first choice. The whole land was there, and Abram said, "You pick. Whatever you want, wherever you want to go there, and I will take what is left." Genesis 13 verse 10, "And Lot lifted up his eyes, and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar." This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. The valley was beautiful. It was lush and green and well irrigated. The Bible compares it to the Garden of Eden itself, to the fertile land of Egypt. From where they stood on the hillside, Lot could see everything spread out below him, and the Jordan Valley was simply the best-looking option available. It was prosperous and verdant, and exactly what a man with large flocks and herds would want to move toward. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley and journeyed east. He chose for himself. The phrase carries something important. Abraham had given him the choice out of generosity, and Lot took the best of what was offered without hesitation. He chose for himself, not for his family first, not with consultation, not with prayer, or any evident seeking of God's direction. He saw what looked good, and he took it. And the two men separated. Abram settled in the land of Canaan. Lot moved his tents as far as Sodom. And then comes a verse that is easy to read past, but should not be. Genesis 13 verse 13. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. The men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. This was not a secret. This was not information Lot would have lacked. The reputation of the cities of the plain was known. And Lot moved his tents as far as Sodom, not into it yet, near it. The first step in a journey that would eventually place him inside its walls, seated at its gate, with his daughters, engaged to men of the city. This is how it works. Not one catastrophic choice, but a series of small movements, each one slightly closer to the thing that should have been avoided entirely. Moved near Sodom, then into Sodom, then comfortable enough in Sodom to have a house there, a position there, family connections there. The city gate was where the elders sat, where business was transacted, where a man of standing took his place in the community. By the time the angels arrived, Lot was not a visitor to Sodom passing through. He was a resident. He belonged there in every way that belonging is measured by the world. But he was not safe there. And before we get to the angels, the Bible shows us a moment that reveals something important about what Lot had gotten himself into. In Genesis 14, a coalition of 4 kings went to war against 5 kings, a regional conflict in which the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah were on the losing side. Their cities were raided. The goods of Sodom and Gomorrah were taken, and Lot, who lived in Sodom, was taken captive as well, along with all his possessions. He had chosen the valley for its prosperity, and now the prosperity, and he himself had been carried off by an enemy army. The city that looked so good from the hillside had its own dangers and its own enemies, and Lot had inherited all of them by choosing it. When Abram heard that his nephew had been taken captive, he acted immediately. He armed his trained men, 318 of them, and pursued the enemy coalition, and defeated them by night, and brought back all the goods and all the people, including Lot. The uncle who had given the nephew the first choice now rescued him from the consequences of that choice. Abram came with 318 men and got Lot back. If Lot drew any lesson from this experience, the Bible does not record it. He went back to Sodom. He stayed. Time passed. The wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah accumulated before God until it reached a point of no return. In Genesis 18, God appeared to Abram's name had been changed by now, and told him that the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah was great, and their sin was very grave. He was going down to see whether what had been reported was true. What followed is one of the most remarkable conversations in all of Scripture. Abraham stood before God and began to intercede for the city. He did not intercede for the city because he loved the city. He interceded because Lot was in it. And Abraham knew what was coming. He pushed back against the judgment with careful, persistent, humble argument. Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous within the city? The Lord said he would spare it for 50. Abraham pushed further. What if there are 45? 40, 30, 20, 10? What if there are 10 righteous people in Sodom? Will you spare it? The Lord said, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. 10 righteous people. Abraham had worked down to 10, and God agreed. And then Abraham went back to his place, and the 2 angels God had sent went down to Sodom. The picture that Genesis 19 opens with is important. Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom, not hiding, not ashamed, not keeping a low profile. Sitting in the gate, the place of honor, the place where the men of standing took their positions in the life of the city. He had not merely survived in Sodom, he had risen in it. He had become someone in it. The city that was great in its wickedness before God had given Lot a seat at the table. When he saw the two men angels in human form, he rose to meet them, and bowed himself with his face to the earth, and invited them urgently to come to his house for the night. He was insistent. He knew something about this city that made him not want these men to spend the night in the open square. He knew what happened in Sodom to strangers in the open after dark. The angels initially said they would spend the night in the town square, but Lot pressed them strongly, and they turned and went with him into his house. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them." The evil of Sodom is on full display here. Not a faction of the city, not a criminal element hiding in dark corners. All the people to the last man, young and old, everyone. The entire city had come to the house where two strangers were guests, and what they wanted to do to those strangers was pure violation. The wickedness was total. It was unanimous. There was not a single voice among the men of Sodom who said, "This is wrong, and we should not do this." And this right here is the answer to Abraham's question. He had asked whether God would spare the city for 10 righteous people. The city surrounded Lot's house with every man it contained, and there were not 10 righteous among them. There was not even one voice of dissent. Lot went out to the men at the door, and what he did next is one of the most troubling passages in the entire Old Testament. He stepped outside and shut the door behind him and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." He offered his daughters. The hospitality ethic of the ancient world was strong. To violate a guest was a profound dishonor, and to protect a guest was a profound duty. Lot understood this. He was trying to protect the men in his house, but the way he tried to protect them by offering his own daughters in their place reveals how deeply the values of the city he lived in had shaped him. He was trying to do the right thing, and the way he chose to do it was catastrophically wrong. The Lot who had traveled with Abraham, who had sat under the teaching of the man who walked with God, who had been rescued by that man from an enemy army, this same man stood in his own doorway and offered his daughters to a mob. The mob was not interested. They pressed against Lot and moved to break down the door. And then the angels reached out their hands and pulled Lot back inside and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out, groping for the door. The angels then told Lot the truth about what was coming. "Have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, anyone you have in the city, bring them out of this place. For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who were pledged to marry his daughters. He told them what the angels had said, and Genesis 19:14 says, "But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting." He seemed to be jesting. The man who had lived in Sodom long enough to have daughters engaged to men of the city, when the moment came to warn those men, they did not believe him. They laughed it off. They thought he was joking. His voice no longer carried the weight it needed to carry. Whatever witness he might have had in that city, whatever credibility the righteousness he maintained in his own soul might have given him, the men who were closest to his family did not take him seriously enough to move when he said move. They stayed. They were lost with the city. As morning arrived, the angels urged Lot to hurry. "Take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city." And while he lingered, while he hesitated, while he delayed, while some part of him apparently could not bring himself to simply go, the angels seized him by the hand, and his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters. For the compassion of the Lord was upon him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. He lingered. He had to be taken by the hand and dragged out. The man who had moved his tents as far as Sodom, who had moved into Sodom, who had risen to the city gate of Sodom when the time came to leave, he lingered. The roots he had grown in the wrong place held him, even when the angels were standing in his house, telling him the fire was coming. When they had brought them out, one of the angels said, "Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. Lot negotiated. Even now, even being dragged out of a burning city by angels, even with the judgment of God moments away, Lot negotiated. He said he could not make it to the hills in time, and asked instead to be allowed to flee to a small city called Zoar. The angel agreed, because even here, even in this moment, the compassion of God was upon Lot. He fled toward Zoar, and the sun rose over the earth as Lot came to Zoar. And then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. The city that had looked so good from the hillside, lush and green and well-watered, like the Garden of Eden, was gone. The valley that had seemed like everything a man with large flocks and herds could want was ash and sulfur. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. The angels had said, "Do not look back." One instruction, one prohibition, and she looked back. Why she looked back is not stated. Perhaps she could not help it. Perhaps she was not as willing to leave as her feet suggested. Perhaps what was behind her held more of her heart than what was ahead of her. We do not know. We only know that she looked back toward the city, toward the life, toward everything they were leaving, and she became a pillar of salt. Jesus himself would later say, "Remember Lot's wife." 3 words, the most compact warning in the Gospels. Remember Lot's wife. Remember what happens when your heart stays behind in the place you are supposed to be leaving. Remember the cost of one backward look when God has said go forward. Lot made it to Zoar, but then fear overtook him, and he left Zoar and went up into the hills and lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. The city he had asked to be allowed to flee to the compromised destination. The negotiated refuge, he left that too and ended up in a cave in the hills. The hills the angel had told him to flee to in the first place. The place he had said he could not reach in time. He ended up there anyway, just without a city, without a wife, without his sons-in-law, without everything he had spent years accumulating in the valley. He was in a cave, with his daughters, and nothing else. What happened in that cave is one of the darkest passages in the book of Genesis. Lot's daughters had lost everything, their mother, their betrothed husbands, their home, the city they grew up in, and they were isolated in a cave with their father and no prospect of a normal future. They reasoned between themselves that their father was old and there was no man in the land to come into them after the manner of all the earth. And so on 2 consecutive nights, they gave their father wine until he was drunk, and they lay with him. Lot did not know what happened on either night. 2 sons were born from those nights. The older daughter's son was named Moab, the father of the Moabites. The younger daughter's son was named Ben-Ammi, the father of the Ammonites. 2 nations that would become persistent thorns in the side of Israel. The consequences of the wrong city kept producing consequences long after Lot himself had left the stage. The Bible does not editorialize on the cave. It simply reports what happened with the same honest directness it uses for everything else. But the full weight of it lands when you trace the line from the hillside to the cave. From the moment Lot lifted up his eyes and chose the well-watered valley from that single choice, made by a man who had every advantage, and chose based on what looked good rather than what was right, everything that followed flows in a straight and terrible line. The proximity to Sodom, the seat at the city gate, the daughters engaged to men of the city, the wife who looked back, the cave, the darkness, the sons who became nations that would trouble Israel for generations. And yet, the New Testament does not throw Lot away. 2 Peter 2:7-8 says that God rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked. For as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. His soul was tormenting him. He knew. He saw the wickedness around him, and it distressed him, and he stayed. He was not made of the same material as the men of Sodom. He had not lost his conscience or his sense of right and wrong. He had not become one of them. He had simply planted himself too close to something too dangerous for too long, and proximity to destruction, even when you are distressed by it, is still proximity to destruction. This is the most searching thing about Lot's story. It is not the story of a man who wanted to be wicked. It is the story of a man who wanted comfort and prosperity. and chose the direction of both, without fully counting what else he was choosing. He wanted the well-watered valley. He got the well-watered valley and everything that lived in it. He wanted a position in the city. He got the seat at the gate and the sons-in-law who laughed when he said judgment was coming. He wanted to stay a little longer when the angels said go. He lingered, and his wife was lost to the backward look. Every step was a small one. None of them felt catastrophic in the moment. And the distance between who Lot was when he stood on the hillside with Abraham and who Lot was in the cave at the end of his story is one of the most sobering distances in all of Scripture. Abraham interceded. Abraham trusted. Abraham left the choice to his nephew and took what remained and built the life God had called him to. And God said to Abraham, after Lot left, "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and to your offspring forever." The land Lot chose with his eyes, the well-watered valley, was destroyed. The land that was left for Abraham after the choice was made, Canaan, the rough country, the land that was not picked first, that land was given to Abraham and his descendants forever. Lot chose with his eyes. Abraham walked by faith. And the distance between those two approaches to life is, in the end, the distance between the valley and the cave. Lot's story does not end with a redemption arc. There is no moment of public restoration, no dramatic return to Abraham's camp, no final scene where he looks back at the ruins of Sodom and speaks wisdom about the choices that led him there. He disappears from the narrative in a cave, and the last thing the Bible records about him is that he did not know what his daughters had done on either of those nights. The man who had been present for so much, the call of Abraham, the wealth of the journey, the rescue from the enemy kings, the visit of the angels, the destruction of Sodom, ended in a cave, in the dark, not knowing. But God had not forgotten him. The rescue from Sodom was not accidental. The angels took him by the hand for a reason. The compassion of the Lord was upon him. The Bible explicitly says, he was saved barely, in the most stripped down, last minute, dragged out by the hand way imaginable, but saved. Not because of the city he chose, or the gate he sat in, or the position he had built for himself. He was saved because of Abraham. In Genesis 19:29, so it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. God remembered Abraham, and for the sake of that memory, Lot walked out of the fire. There is a mercy in that which is almost too large to receive. Lot did not earn his rescue. He had compromised and lingered and negotiated and delayed. He had offered his daughters to a mob. He had watched his sons-in-law laugh at the warning. He had been dragged by the hand through the gate of a doomed city by angels. He had done almost nothing right, and God sent him out of the overthrow because he remembered Abraham. The intercession of Abraham reached into the fire and pulled Lot out. Not because Lot deserved it, because Abraham asked, and because God remembered. What do we do with Lot's story? What is it supposed to leave in us? The first thing is the warning about the choice. Lot chose with his eyes. He saw what was well-watered and green and prosperous, and he moved toward it without asking whether the company it kept was worth the prosperity it offered. The choices that cost us most are rarely the dramatic ones. They are the ones that look like simple, practical decisions: where to live, what to move toward, which opportunity to take choices where the visible logic is sound, and the invisible cost does not show itself until much later. The second thing is the warning about proximity. Lot did not become a man of Sodom, but he became a man in Sodom, and the difference, while real, was not enough to protect him from what proximity to Sodom cost him. His wife was lost to it. His sons-in-law were lost in it. His daughters were shaped by it in ways that led to what happened in the cave. You do not have to become what you are near to be damaged by it. Proximity has its own cost. The third thing, perhaps the most hopeful, is the intercession. Abraham stood before God and pushed back against the judgment for the sake of the righteous who might be in the city. And even when there were not enough righteous to spare the city, the intercession reached Lot. The prayers of a faithful man covered a compromised nephew in the middle of divine judgment. This does not mean that Lot's choices had no consequences. the ruins of his life are the evidence of their consequences, but it means that the faithfulness of someone who loved him was still active on his behalf, even when he was too tangled in the wrong city to fully save himself. There are people in every generation who are in the wrong city, who went in the direction of what looked good and found themselves tangled in what was not. And there are people in every generation who stand before God and intercede for them. The story of Lot and Abraham is in part the story of what faithful intercession can do for someone who cannot find their own way out. If this story stirred something in you, do not let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story we bring to life. There are so many more lives and warnings and mercies still waiting to be told. And if Lot's story made you look honestly at the direction you have been moving, at the cities you have been choosing with your eyes, and what they are costing you in ways you may not have fully seen yet, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if there is a lot in your life, someone tangled in the wrong place, too close to the wrong thing, lingering when they should be going, remember Abraham. Stand before God on their behalf, because God remembered Abraham, and Lot walked out of the fire. Until the next story, may you walk closely with the God who never fails.